Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Matthew Dickerson. Tech Talk. Sit back and relax. It's time to talk technology.
Hello, influencers. It's time to unfurl the virtual yoga mat, stretch out, tone your cores, shed some toxins, and get in tune with your digital chakra. It's time again for Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. And here, just cleaning up the last of his chickpeas and goji berries from his Buddha bowl, it's the illustrious, deeply enlightened guru of all things gadgetry and futuristic. It's Matthew Dickerson. Namaste, Matt.
Guru, I'm not sure if that's an insult or a compliment, is it?
No, it's definitely a compliment.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, all-seeing, all-knowing. I think that's what it means. That's what it was intended.
I just think the word's thrown around a bit loosely these days. Some people claim self-guru title.
Oh, it's a bit of a sledge. This guy's a guru.
Yeah. That's right. Hey, I'll tell you the compliment. Thank you very much.
Yeah, as intended.
So I've actually come back from the tennis. The Australian Open's on at the moment, or just finished, and so I've come back from the tennis. Watched a bit of tennis. Now, I haven't been to the tennis for a few years. During COVID, obviously, there wasn't the ability to go to the tennis, and I've been meaning to go back. I used to go fairly regularly.
And there's nothing like live sport?
Nothing like live sport. No, nothing like sitting in front of the TV watching it in the comfort of your lounge. No, live sport is great.
I reckon being there and just soaking out the atmosphere and seeing everything, I reckon that's awesome.
No, I absolutely agree. But one of the things that struck me, and it's obvious, and it's been for a few years, but it still struck me, was I'm watching the tennis and I'm looking around the court and I'm going, it seems like it's not a very crowded court. It used to be a bit more crowded. And then I looked again and I've gone, oh, that's right, of course. There used to be a whole lot
of hangers-on, a whole lot of people there.
Well, lines people.
Oh, of course.
Calling the lines. And so you'd have people calling the baseline, the sidelines, obviously the service line, the service centre line. So it's probably, 5 people at each end. So there were 10 people that used to be hanging around the court.
Yeah, right.
You've got the ball people as well. They're all there ready to do what they do, and they do a fantastic job. But I looked down and I went, wow, I know there's no lines people. I know there's automatic calling, but it still looks a bit strange. And then I started watching it a bit more and just taking a bit more attention. And then, of course, couldn't help myself. So I started Googling about the automatic line calling and the Hawkeye system that they use there. And it's actually quite fascinating. When that was first introduced, and Australia was the first Grand Slam to go totally calling, what are they called? Are they line people?
Yeah.
Totally vacant of lines people.
Yeah.
And that was back at the beginning of the pandemic. So 2021, it was the first Grand Slam to have no lines people at all.
Yeah, right.
And so the players were a bit unsure about it all. But if you remember back to the stage when they were first introducing automatic line calling, and there were some stages there where there was...
We could protest it.
You could protest. There was a DRS system, I'm not sure if it was called DRS, but like cricket, a DRS. So you didn't like the line call, you held your racket up or you did something and...
But it was more to make people feel good about themselves, wasn't it? Like how they could dispute it.
Maybe.
Did they ever overturn them at all?
Well, this is the thing. So I think back in those days, there was a person calling the line, and then if the player wasn't happy, they'd say, no, I want to dispute that. Then they'd go to the Hawkeye system as a secondary backup system, and then you'd hear the kind of slight groan and then raising cheer from the crowd if it looked like the ball was going to go in or out, and depending on which player they were going for. And so that was the first step. Yeah. But 2021, they said, we're not going to have any lines people at all. And again, I haven't been to the tennis since the pandemic. And so I'm there and I'm watching it, and it's really quite eerie because the ball lands and you'll hear a human voice say out or fault, and you look around and there's no human calling it. So they've actually recorded humans' voices, male and female, and they actually have it calling out.
And it doesn't sound like Siri, the ball was out.
No, maybe they should do that. But it sounds exactly like a person would be there. It's kind of a short, sharp yell. But what I started to look at was the technology behind that. You've got cameras, a number of cameras, anywhere from, say, 6 to 10 cameras around the court, recording at approximately 540 frames per second. Yeah, so compared to normal video in Australia is 25 frames per second. And then it's doing a whole bunch of calculations to determine, because at 540 frames per second, the fastest serve is 263 kilometres an hour. So at that speed, one frame would be somewhere in the vicinity of 13 centimetres, I think that's right, that the ball would move in that one frame at that speed.
Oh, okay.
So you could still have a fair bit of difference. Now they claim
13 centimetres, that's in or out.
That's right. Now they claim the accuracy of their system is within 3.6 millimetres. So there's obviously some calculations done between each frame, and obviously the ball's travelling in a certain direction, so they can extrapolate that out and say here's where it would be at these different points. But what's really fascinating is the players hear the call out, and you can see them kind of going, I've got no one to protest against. John McEnroe would have been completely...
Yeah, that was the first thing I thought about. McEnroe would have just had nothing to chew over.
Well, what would he have done? He would have started yelling and complaining, and who do I complain to? Where's the guy who wrote this program? He's sitting over in England somewhere, maybe. Yeah, that's probably right. But it was actually quite fascinating, but it actually meant the game moved on quicker. There was no waiting for a replay. There was no getting frustrated. There was no waiting for the chair umpire to maybe overrule the lines person. It was just, that was the call, and the players just moved on. You could see them hesitate, but they just moved on and played the next point. So I actually found it quite fascinating. I feel a bit sorry for all the lines people that are now out of work. They were paid money to sit there and call lines. And
it's AI taking our jobs.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So hopefully some of those lines people are in programming the AI and helping with that side of it. But I did find it quite fascinating. And I know I probably sound a bit behind the times because it's been in for a few years, but it was just fascinating being there, watching it happen in real life and just seeing how the game just flowed on and moved. People complain about the DRS in cricket, for example, because they stopped the game. But in this, it was done, but it was also done so quickly. It was the ball landed, and if it was out, the call was out as quick as a person standing there doing it.
Just a whole lot of don't argue.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, very good. Okay, we've got a bunch of good goodies to tuck into today. We've got a couple of tech developments for farmers, one for the fans of the Concorde, if you can remember back that far, and a little something for partners of snorers craving a good night's sleep. But our first story today comes courtesy of the source of all our energy, so let's soak in some sunlight and get stuck in. Imagine a world where your gadgets are always charged, but minus all the cords and clutter. Listen in, folks, as we shed light on some cutting-edge indoor solar technology that's making this dream a reality. We're taking a leaf out of the Book of Nature. If plants can photosynthesize indoors, then surely a solar cell can work its magic indoors as well, Matt.
Now, do you remember those rich kids at school that used to have a solar-powered calculator?
Or a solar-powered watch.
Oh, that was a bit over the top. I didn't know anyone that rich. I only knew the rich kids with the solar-powered calculators. Yeah. So they were quite fascinating. And you'd always have someone who was using it. And just to prove that it was really solar-powered, they'd put their hand over the solar panels and the screen went dead and you lift it off and, it was alive again. How cool was that?
Living in the future.
That was a long time ago. I was at school a long time ago. But we're at the point now where we've got some dye-sensitized solar cells appearing on products that do actually work indoors.
Yeah, so solar cells, you get a calculator work, but not much else. And so, when you're working indoors. And so that's always been a bit of a problem. It's just light. It just needs light.
Well, and the problem
it's got to be the right frequency.
Well, it has, but it's also the problem is when you look at the normal crystalline silicon-based solar panels or even the amorphous silicon cells, then they're relying on sunlight, they're relying on brighter light. The normal solar panels that you see don't really work indoors in light. And let's just say, for the moment, let's go on a quick diversion. We haven't discovered endless power here. We can't turn the light on, have it shine on some solar panels, and then power the light and then go around in circles forever.
We haven't invented energy here.
That's right. So we're just changing its form and we lose a bit along the way. But you've got a number of products now with these dye-sensitized solar cells that are reacting to low amounts of light. So we're talking about indoor light here. So what we're going to do with these, you've got products coming out now, headphones, earbud cases, TV remotes, so things that don't need too much power, and even some things that are outdoors. So helmets, we did an article last year where you had someone with, or a company that came out with a helmet with some of these solar panels on it, and they could then charge up your lights, for example. That was still sunlight though, but these other ones are relying on indoor light. Now the good part is here, we know we waste a lot of resources when we mine to create batteries, and then we use those batteries and then we throw them back into landfill. If we can avoid that, that sounds like a good thing. So you've got some of these products that are just using small rechargeable batteries, and it only needs enough charge so that if you turn the lights off or you're not in that enough light area for a short amount of time, it's okay. But some of these products are actually using supercapacitors, which you take a capacitor, it stores power for a short amount of time. A supercapacitor does that a bit better. It does it like a supercapacitor. But again, you're not even using a battery with a capacitor. And again, your remote control, you're probably going to have the lights on. And if you turn the lights off, that's not off for long. There'll be enough power stored in that capacitor to be able to send a signal to your TV. It's not using a lot of power to do that. And that's the secret here. These products are not using much power. If you want to do it something like a smartphone, then it's just not going to have enough power sitting in your home to create enough power to power your smartphone.
When we
Just
get the
use
super capacitors.
Maybe that's right. It's only going to store the power though. It's still got to get it from somewhere.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things. But I think with lots of little products indoors, that to me sounds attractive. And it also means you probably would get more products. You'd probably get more smart home products, more sensors, for example. If you can just rely on the fact that I'm not using a rechargeable battery that degrades, I'm just using a capacitor, and I'm always going to have enough light around to have some power there, then I could use this sensor, whatever it might be, without having to worry about a battery. Now, I know there's one of my electronic locks in the house that I use my watch to get into the house with, and the only downside of that is that it's got normal batteries in it, and I have to replace them every couple of months. It's a first world problem, I know, but it seems like a bit of a pain.
That's annoying.
It is,
yeah.
Especially if I've
for
been
something
away.
that's such an awesome piece of technology. To have to go and replace the batteries every couple of months.
So that was one I thought of. Now, that doesn't use much power. It does when it's actually activating the lock, but the rest of the time it's sitting there. It's sitting there for 99.9% of the time. So having something like this on there that just picked up the light in the room probably would be enough to keep some rechargeable batteries charged up, and then it would need the higher current that the rechargeable batteries would give it when it's actually activating the lock. So you start to think about that and you go, well, that means I don't have to replace those batteries and all the things that you've got batteries in. Then you start to think about, I know it sounds silly, I've got a remote control on my push bike to control my bike computer. Right. I know it saves me an extra half a metre of stretching over with my arm, but it's just convenient at the grip. I'm trying to justify it to myself here.
Keep going, listening.
So my thumb can just reach the control. It's got one of those nice little flat battery or the watch type batteries in it. So again, every few months I've got to replace that battery. Wouldn't it be nice if it just had some of these solar panels on there and it kept it charged up all the time? So I think once we see some of these products come out, which we are seeing now, you'll see a lot more products that are actually using this, and then we start to get the stage where we throw away the concept of batteries, or we get rechargeable batteries and might have to replace every few years, not every few months. So it sounds pretty exciting.
How do they build in, that obsolescence thing? So they can keep selling them?
All the battery manufacturers out there, what are we going to do now? Well, you've got a fair few rechargeables to sell till you get to that point in time.
Exactly.
So it does sound quite fascinating, though, and I love the fact that it's something that we used a long time ago in those calculators, and it's kind of come back, but it's come back to the point where it's actually more practical to be used now.
There's quite a bit of interest from our listeners about personal medical monitors, and we hate to disappoint here at Tech Talk. Introducing the BeamO. It's a 4-in-1 device that'll provide some very useful data, particularly for those of us with cardiac conditions. Matt, a very handy little gadget here.
It is. It actually does 4 things, as you mentioned there. It's a thermometer, it's an electrocardiogram, it's an oximeter.
Yeah, an ECG.
That's right, and a stethoscope. Now, one thing it doesn't do is take your blood pressure. And the only reason I mention that is because I love your pronunciation.
Oh, the sphygmomanometer.
Thank you, that's it. So it doesn't do that for you, but it does just about everything else. Now, I'm a bit worried about one part of this. When I go into a medical practice or a hospital, I can immediately work out who the doctors are by the stethoscope hanging around their neck.
Yeah, okay.
Now, if you take that away and give them a little device that looks like, well, it's a bit smaller than a smartphone, and they've got that to replace their stethoscope, how am I going to know who the doctors are? How are they going to say
they're not going to feel like doctors?
They're not going to. No, they're probably going to throw away their whole career because they can't walk around with a stethoscope. Now, what's fascinating about this is it changes what it does as you point it at different parts of your body. So if you point it, for example, exactly, at your chest, then it actually works as a stethoscope. And you plug in a little headphone. So the doctor plugs a little headphone and listens to your chest. And so all the things that might be picked up with that cold stethoscope that goes on. I remember as a kid, you go to the doctor and lift up your shirt and it's so cold, doctor, can't you warm it up a little bit first?
But you felt like you were going to the doctor's.
Oh,
now
you did.
It's just...
Well, point this at your chest and I can...
phone.
That's right. I can hear what's happening inside your chest. Point it at your forehead and it picks up the temperature. So depending on where you point it at your body, that's where it'll do different things. Now, this is probably one of those things that I would say is great for home users, anyone that's got some concerns about their health. If we can monitor our health more. And again, it's one of those things, if you treasure it, then measure it. So if you're worried about different parts of your body, then measure it and see how it's going. And then, oh, wait up, that doesn't look so good. My blood oxygen level's not great, or maybe my heart rate is jumping or a bit
We're
variable.
feeding hypochondria here.
Well, maybe too. So you're doing all that and you're going to the doctor and say, look at this, doc, it's all
goes,
normal, okay.
yeah,
That's
you'll
how-
be okay.
Your heart does sound a bit strange. That's how it should sound. But the idea of this to me is just really giving access to some basic medical ideas or items for everyone. And then when they see something, again, I always say, go and see the doctor. I can see doctors having these in their surgeries, but I can see people having
Well, the
these as well.
ECG interests me because having had a couple of ECGs, they got to stick the little things, the electrodes all over your body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to do that with a device that you point at your body, now, again, is it as accurate as the ECG with all the leads and the machine that goes bing? Well, probably not quite as accurate as that, but it gives you an indication. And all of these things we talk
it's the
about,
start. It's the first bit.
with the wearables, with our bio wearables, with our health sensors, all of these things at home, you're paying about $350 for this. So you're probably not going to get the same level that you would get in the hospital, but you're still getting an indication. And sometimes it can be change. So you're monitoring it on a week-by-week basis and you notice some change. That might be an indicator to go and see the doctor. The raw data, the raw numbers may not be as accurate as a machine in the hospital, but if you're noticing that change, that might be enough to indicate that something's happening.
Well, the oximeter, I think, is a useful one. When you get crook, you can be quite low on oxygen.
Yeah,
And
so
you need, about 96% or something?
yeah, normally you're getting up around that, aren't you? So again, it just seems like a pretty cool concept. It's from Withings, and they do a whole range of different medical devices, and I think that's something that they've really captured as their niche, and they're working out what else they can do, what else can they monitor with non-invasive devices. So it sounds fascinating.
Fantastic. The story of the Concorde is a very interesting one, from its concept to the retirement in 2003. For 30 years, it shuttled people at supersonic speeds between Europe and the US. The flight path over the Atlantic Ocean meant that it could regularly drop a sonic boom without disturbing the people below. A sonic boom. It's an impressive thing. But if you were living under the regular flight path, I can imagine that it would get pretty old pretty quick. So NASA reckon they've got the answer, Matt.
They do think they've got an answer. Let's explore the sonic boom for a moment. I find this concept quite fascinating.
Yeah.
So at sea level at about 20 degrees Celsius, the speed of sound is about 343 metres per second. So you're going along in a vehicle, well, probably not a car, but a plane, at, say, sea level. When your plane starts travelling faster than that, you're actually compressing the airwaves or the sound waves that are trying to get out of the road.
Well, yeah, and you've caught up with the sound that you've just created.
Isn't that fascinating? You've caught up with the sound. So you're going along and then you're getting that almost that double compression, which ends up being that sonic boom. Now, of course...
And you can look at pictures of it. Guys, Google this and check out pictures of fighter jets breaking. And you've got this cloud that forms around the plane, this disc cloud.
Yeah.
It's impressive.
It is. It's very cool. And of course, it's that whole thing about the difference in speed between sound and light. We're not going to catch up with light because we can't go faster than light anyway. But I do remember one of our science teachers at school, he was demonstrating the difference in speed between light and sound. And so he had two bits of, it might have been a blackboard rubber and another metal or timber instrument, and he'd walk a metre away and he'd clap those two together. So he said they look simultaneous, don't they? He said, I'll keep walking away and then tell me when they're different. And of course, we got together at the class and said, we'll just keep telling him they look the same. So he's way across the other side of the playground, hitting the two together. No, they look the same so far.
Right down the road about a kilometre.
That's right.
Are you sure?
But yeah, you do see, you don't have to get that far away, and you see a difference between the two
Well, anyone
devices
who's been to
coming
the
together.
cricket, watch the cricket, and from the boundary line, you can see them hit the ball.
Yeah.
And then you hear the...
And then you think someone beside you's just hit some bit of timber there. So it's quite fascinating. Now, when you get up a bit higher, obviously the speed of sound changes, more to do with the temperature. So, for example, when you get up to about 10,000 metres, which a lot of aircraft fly around that sort of height, then you're getting down to probably minus 50 degrees Celsius. So the speed of sound drops at that level to about 295 metres per second. So it's actually easier to create a sonic boom the higher you go because the speed of sound drops. So you're catching up to it easier. This is all a problem in a first world scenario when we can't fly at the speed of sound across, say, for example, mainland USA. It's illegal to go and fly a commercial jetliner. So the Concorde, for example, would take off typically from New York and go across to London.
Yeah.
It could go across America, but there wasn't much point because it couldn't go above the speed of sound. They weren't allowed to go.
Yeah, they weren't allowed to, yeah.
Physically it could have done it, but you can imagine why, because you're sitting there having a nice cup of tea in the afternoon and you hear this sonic boom. I imagine that it's pretty loud. I can't say I've ever been underneath
Well, I
a sonic
remember
boom.
someone who did it here in our town, and it was actually, it must have been 15 years ago now,
Right.
and it was impressive.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. We actually ran out of the classroom to go and check it out. And, of course, you look up at the wrong spot. The plane is no longer in the spot where you can, thought the sound was coming from.
Yeah, of course. So what NASA's doing now is they've got an X-59 aircraft. Now, they think they can fly faster than the speed of sound without creating a sonic boom. And, of course, the first thing I say is, so what, they're just going to ignore physics? They're going to say that physics is there, but we don't care about physics? What they're doing is they're trying to essentially ease their way through the air rather than smack their way through the air.
Okay.
So they've got a long nose. About a third of the plane is made up of nose. And it's a very pointy nose, a bit like the Concorde was a bit pointy, but this goes a lot pointier. And so that's kind of trying to be very aerodynamic as it goes through the air. They then put the engines on top of the plane rather than out sitting to the sides or at the bottom of the wings like they used to be in the Concorde. So they're trying to minimise that sound from the engines as well. But they think they've got a design of an aircraft that still creates some sound, but not a deafening sonic boom. Whether they want to get to the stage where they fly commercial aircraft across the mainland, that's for someone to explore in the future. But at this stage, they think they'll have their first flight for the end of this year or before the end of this year, where they'll fly this across mainland USA, probably not across New York in the first instance. They'll probably do some testing out in the desert somewhere and then get to the point where they can fly at about 1.4 times the speed of sound. So at the height they're flying out, maybe 1,500 kilometres an hour.
There's got to be a market for it.
Well-
There's got to be a market for people who want to fly across Europe or fly across the States, getting from New York to LA or vice versa in an hour rather than 3 hours.
Well, the thing is, we seem to have
4 or 5,
almost
I don't know how long it takes,
hit a bit of a standstill. We take about the same amount of time to fly around different locations. Sydney to Perth, for example, we've probably been at the same speed for the last 2 or 3 decades doing that. So we haven't really progressed that far because that damn physics gets in the road again.
Yeah.
But if they can do something with this, I agree with you. There is a market. Absolutely, there's a market there for it.
Yeah, and we know that the market dropped out for the Concorde, but that was specifically for people who want to fly between Europe and the States.
Yeah, because you had a bit of ocean there where the sonic boom wasn't such a big issue, apart from some sailors out there going, what was that there?
But if you open that up, it'd be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah.
I look forward to it.
And a bit like the Concorde, they've got no forward-facing window, so the pilots have to fly without seeing out in front of them. Remember the Concorde, the nose would drop down and pull up once you started flying, so you're sitting in the cockpit and you can't see out the front of the plane, which is a bit eerie, but obviously you've got enough other instruments in there to know exactly what's happening, you hope. So keep an eye out for that one, keep an ear out even for that one. End of this year, we'll see that flying.
There can be no question. The use of biometrics has improved the security of our personal devices out of sight. Humble fingerprint scans and facial recognition are fairly standard these days on most phones, but some clever cookies at the Indian Institute of Technology in Madras reckon that a person's breath is as good as either of those two options. Matt, surely there are too many variables in a person's breath which would render it a non-option. Surely this is just a bunch of hot air.
Oh, please. Just waited for that whole intro for that one.
I was building up to it.
So let me talk first of all about security on phones. Back in the old days when we had basic phones and flip phones, that type of thing, most people didn't have a pin on there because if someone stole your phone, the worst they'd normally do is they'd run up a phone bill.
Yeah.
But you'd discover that and you'd cut off your phone or you'd tell your carrier to please put a block on your phone. And then we started to get a few contacts in our address book, so we put a pin on there, but you had a few goes at it for a 4-digit pin. Well, let's face it, there's only 10,000 options for a 4-digit pin, so you might guess a few, postcode or whatever. But then we started to get a lot of information on our phones when smartphones came along.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just a nice little pin that you wanted to lock it with. You'd use your face, you'd use your fingerprint. So they were getting better methods. But fingerprint, well, if I really want to steal your phone and get into it, I just cut your finger off and take your phone and away I go, which I know sounds a bit, something that's not going to happen, but it has happened. People have actually had fingers cut off to steal their phone and their data, and away they go.
And facial recognition can actually work with pictures of the person, can't it?
Pictures or siblings or sometimes people that are closely related. So it's not perfect as well. So we're trying to get our phone security better. And when I talk about phone security, a whole range of things. I've been to data centers where you had to scan your face to get into the data center. So there's a whole range of biometrics. The ultimate security is to have something, to know something, and to be someone. So combine facial recognition with some type of PIN and some type of device that's got some code that is regenerated every minute or so. So that's the ultimate security. But for most people, they're not going to do all that to get into their phone. So these researchers at the Indian Institute of Technology have said the breath pattern of each person on this planet is unique. Now, unique's a big claim.
Yes.
Mostly unique. I hate it when people start putting things around unique. Unique is binary. It's either unique or it isn't. But unique, it means that every breath pattern. Now,
I'm just thinking that I'm not using my phone if I finished a park run, and neither is anyone else who's just finished their park run.
Well, I was thinking, coming out of India, you have a nice curry, does your breath smell a little bit different? So it's not about the smell. It's not about the molecules coming out of your mouth so much. It's about the velocity. It's about the way they come out. So it doesn't matter whether you've just done a park run or whether you've eaten a curry.
Yeah.
It's all about the actual shape of your air path, your canal, your throat, that as the air comes out, it creates different velocity, different turbulence, and they believe that's unique to every person on this planet. They've tested with 2 people so far. No, they've tested with more than 2 people. But that's the thing. It seems like such a strange thing. But when you start to talk about getting things that are unique and being able to unlock things, the great part about that is that you need a person alive. So I can't take a picture and then use their face. I can't cut off their hand or their thumb and use that to get in. I need the person to still be breathing, because how else am I going to replicate that breath pattern apart from the person still breathing?
Well, can't you wave your hand in front of it?
In front of the breath?
Well, in front of the phone, and just like with a fan, or have an adjustable. I don't know.
There might be.
I'm just thinking this has got to be a furphy.
Well, no, they're doing serious research on it.
Yeah, okay.
Now,
well, and I look forward to being wearing the egg on my face when all this is said and done. But I just cannot believe that you can open your phone with your breath.
Well, but it would sound quite fascinating, wouldn't it? You'd start talking to your phone and that would unlock your phone and away you go. You'd have the conversation, or you'd unlock it and do whatever you want with it. So it's fascinating where we're headed, and it's also fascinating the amount of research that's going into more security using our bodies to be able to protect our data, because our data on our phone now is so important. And then our data on other parts, so getting into your house, getting into your business, getting into your car, you might just need to breathe on all of those and away you go. You don't sound convinced.
I'm sure many of our listeners out there have youngsters who are either on their L plates or their P plates. Building confidence in a learner is so important, but I tell you, those moments of panic, hesitation or indecision can really get the adrenaline pumping in amongst the traffic there. But then there comes a time when a P-plater's confidence well and truly overrides their level of experience, and risk-taking is suddenly much more commonplace than a discerning parent would otherwise prefer. Matt, speaking as a father with kids at this stage of life, any tools to help development of a young driver's experience here would be warmly welcomed.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And to give you an idea of how scary the stats are, in 2021, the data that came out of the US, for example, said that drivers aged 15 to 20, I'm not sure why 15, but anyway, that's the bracket.
I think you
there.
can get your L's a bit younger than here in Australia.
Oh, can you? Okay.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. And I say L's, but they don't even carry L plates, I don't think.
Right. So ages 15 to 20, they constitute only 5% of the drivers in the US, but the number of kilometres they do is less than that, because you've got older people who are travelling many more kilometres. So you've got 5% of the drivers, about 3% of the actual kilometres driven, and then you've got 8.4% of that age group involved in fatal traffic accidents.
Yeah.
So the data says what we would guess at, but it's always nice to have some data to back you up, to say that young people, both inexperienced and by the very nature, younger people don't always equate risk to consequences. So they sometimes take risks without thinking about the consequences.
Oh, and a lot of the time have greater confidence in their own skills and in the movement of traffic around them or in the conditions. Just poor judgment. It takes a while to build your judgment.
And the other part is that you don't always realise that when you're driving on the road, you've got to drive your car and then be aware of other cars.
For sure.
So you might do the right thing, but if you're a slightly more cautious driver or more experienced, you might realise that guy on the road on the side there who's not looking your direction may actually pull out in front of you. He's in the wrong still, but a more experienced driver...
You've still got to deal with an accident.
That's right. And the more experienced driver might hold back going, that person hasn't looked in my direction. I'll just hold back a little bit. I hate the creepers at intersections, the guys and girls who just slowly creep. You go, are they going to go? Are they going to go? I'm just going to hold back a bit. And then you're holding back and then they're going, is that person stopping or is that person going? So just stop. When it's a stop sign, just stop.
Yeah.
Anyway, when you start to look at how we can improve this, there's a whole range of ways. And I know with my kids, I took them down to a motorsport park where they had defensive driver training, a big skid pan, put water across it. They put a bunch of cones out there and for a day they get the kids to go through and do emergency braking, emergency steering, emergency evasion. And there's most times people do an emergency brake the first time a car is in front of them or a kangaroo jumps out in front of them. But on this day, all these kids, and again, all my kids have done this, went through and did 50 or 100 emergency braking situations. So when it happens in the real world, hopefully they're more prepared for it because they've practiced for it. It makes sense. That's expensive to do that, though. What we've got in Ohio at the moment is that you've got a test set up, which has got a bit like a game. It's got a driving wheel, brake pedal, accelerator, and a laptop running some assessment software. They run a 15-minute test. And in that, they just have them drive around the city, not going out on a racetrack trying to beat Sebastian Vettel. They have them driving around a normal city environment with pedestrians, with just normal cars coming in and out. And what they're doing is they're monitoring all of their actions, but they're also monitoring their eyes. And at the end of that, they give them an analysis. How have you done? What were the things that you did well? What were the things you didn't do so well? So I was reading some of the reports, and for example, there was one person, they said, when you get onto a straight stretch of road, you tended to go over the speed limit. You're doing this for 15 minutes in an assessment, so you think you'd stick to the speed limit in that assessment, but a straight road, they just naturally started going a bit faster because why not? It's a nice straight stretch of road. They actually found people were having trouble with different corners, maybe turning left. They had less awareness than people turning right. Where were their eyes moving on the screen? Were they looking towards that traffic where it would be coming from? Yeah. So what they did with all of that, they said, we've got an assessment now to say how we think you'll go. They did 17,000 drivers, young drivers, through this program to begin with, and then assessed how many of those drivers were involved in accidents in the months afterwards. And so they found that the best performing people on the tests had a 10% lower crash risk after they actually had their licence out driving, and those that performed poorly had an 11% higher risk. So what translated from those tests was real world. They replicated what happened on that 15-minute test. Take that information from the test, then start to do some training around that. So you performed poorly or you weren't aware of left turns or whatever it might be, so we need to do some extra training on that. Be more
aware of that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And if you're aware of that, hopefully you can do some intervention and try and do some extra training around those things, because we don't want to lose people at any age in a car accident, but using young people with so much potential is obviously a terrible tragedy. So I love the idea of it. I would like us to see it be compulsory to do more driver training. Again, that makes it expensive and sometimes people say it's not accessible. But at least with something like this, it's fairly cost effective. It's a computer setup and 15 minutes of work, and then you've got some things to work on. So I applaud the people that have set this up, and hopefully it'll spread much further.
For sure. Now, we've explored a number of solutions to snoring on this podcast over the years. It's clearly an area of great importance. A good night's sleep for all is a precious thing, so any solution needs to work for all parties involved. Matt, if only there was an answer in something as comfy as a pillow.
It does sound interesting, doesn't it? An anti-snoring pillow. You think, so what's it do? Does it wrap over the top of you and just start to muffle your breath? It doesn't sound like there's a good outcome from that.
It's just the gurgling sounds of someone suffocating. Right.
It doesn't do that, you'll be pleased to know. What it does do is it detects slight movements indicating snoring and slight sounds, just those initial sounds before the full-blown 747 snore starts to come out, and then adjusts the sleeper's head. So it's got some AI built into it. It links to an app so I can give you a report in the morning on how it's all gone. And it's got some little air pillows within the pillow that it can use to inflate and adjust the actual air and where you might move your head around. It sounds much more comfortable than, say, a knee in the back from your partner in bed with you.
Punch in the arm.
That's right. And as you keep getting, if you do keep getting a bit louder, it will make more movements and change things. Now, this is the same company, Deere, who actually makes sleep mattresses as well, where they've got different things that they might do in the mattress to try and help you with comfortable positions and make it more comfortable. But this is the first time they've come up with an anti-snoring pillow. Now, you've got to be serious about it. You're paying almost $1,000 for this anti-snoring pillow.
Okay.
So you then start to weigh up the cost of a knee in the back compared to the cost of an anti-snoring pillow. But you're right, we have done a few different products around snoring. It's obviously a big problem. I don't have any data to back this up, but obviously with various companies bringing out anti-snoring products, it must be a big problem out there in society with lots of people snoring.
Sure.
So if
for anyone who's had to tolerate a snorer,
well, there's help on the way.
Good
We've
luck.
talked about watches. We've talked about different products that might wake you up. Maybe some electric shock treatment there and there thrown in somewhere. But this is quite fascinating. This was revealed at CES 2024, but it is available. And essentially you could go and get this, well, maybe not right now because you'd probably have a bit of a pre-order process, but you can buy this if you have got a snore in your life and it's worth spending $1,000 on them, then this is worthwhile.
how much is a
looking
good
at.
night's sleep worth to you?
Yeah, well, at least $1,000 you'd hope.
2 weeks ago, we brought you news of a mighty clash where Apple had infringed upon some of Massimo's, and I think I've said that right, Massimo's health monitoring patents with two of their smartwatch models. That's two of Apple's smartwatch models. Matt's here with an update on what actually does happen when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object.
Well, you need an experiment, don't you? It's always a theory of the unstoppable force and the immovable object. So how do you solve that problem? You put it to the test in the real world.
And here we go.
And the real world test, normally I'd say Apple wins every time because they have more solicitors than they do have innovators. I know that's true or not, but it seems like that sometimes, that they have a pretty big army of a legal team to go and approach everything like this. And it's normally Apple that's being the aggressor. It's normally someone who's named their store Apples Are Us because they sell Granny Smith apples, and Apple comes along and says, sorry, we own that word, you can't use that. In this case, they're not the aggressor. Massimo has said, hold on, that's our patent. We want you to stop sales. Now, the court ruled they had to stop sales. Now, of course, Apple didn't take that lying down. They said, well, we don't agree with that. We'll go and try and fight that. But what they're having to do at the moment is a software update to address the patent infringement. So it means that they've just reduced one of the features in their Apple Watch. Now, they'll keep fighting it, but for them to be able to keep selling it, the Biden administration upheld the ruling from the ITC, which is the International Trade Commission, and so they said, basically, they formalised the ban when they did that. So for Apple to keep selling their products, and they don't want to stop these products being sold in the US, they said, okay, we'll do a software update, we'll remove that feature via software, we'll keep fighting you, and the good part about that is, if they then win the court battle, they can then turn it back on in the software. So it's interesting.
Okay.
I mean, I would have thought from Apple's perspective, and this isn't the way they do things, but if Massimo said you've infringed their patent and they've got a reasonable argument, which obviously they have because the court's ruled in their favour, then I would have thought that Apple would have said, here's some money, go away, we'll continue to sell our watch. But Apple doesn't like to do that. They don't like to pay money out. They'd rather pay their solicitors than they would pay someone else for a patent. So I do like the fact that maybe the small guy is actually having a bit of a victory over the big guy. There is this constant battle of power between the big guys and small innovators. You want those small innovators to still look like they can keep doing things and keep innovating.
Yeah, otherwise you run out of ideas. You're completely reliant on the big guys to come up with all the ideas.
That's right, and sometimes they get a bit safe, sometimes they get a bit complacent. Yeah. We've seen that with various companies. Motorola did it with mobile phones, Nokia did it with mobile phones, Toyota's doing it now with cars. So you get these market leaders and they become a bit complacent when they're out in front. And I remember seeing a quote from Kathy Freeman around the 2000 Olympics. It was this wonderful poster advertising some product that she was selling, obviously, and it said the way to stay number one is to act like you're number two. And it's true. If you get to number one and think, I've got it now, I've got it made, that's when you become complacent. That's when you rest on your laurels, and then suddenly you blink and the world's gone past you. So you've got to be continuing to innovate. So I like the fact that some of the small guys having a bit of a crack and stirring up the big guys. Where this ends up, I think Apple will win eventually, but it's a bit of a wake-up call along the way.
Yeah, and hopefully it's more about innovation than it is about legal arm wrestling. And so we want people to come up with good innovations.
Well, I love the fact that when I read one of the parts of the legal argument, it said the ITC opposed Apple's request to stay the sales ban, and they cited the lack of a convincing argument from Apple.
What am I paying you for? You army of lawyers.
Yeah, is that the best you came up with? I want a convincing argument, okay? So does that mean if they had a convincing argument, the ITC, well, gee, that's pretty convincing. We'll let you go back and start selling those products again. Keep tuned to this one, and we'll bring you updates as they come through. But it is something that I think that's quite interesting in the legal/technical world.
Now, this following story is not a subject where I can speak from a whole lot of experience, but I think that I can imagine that calving season might be a particularly stressful time for a cattle grazier. You've got to be out in the paddock for long hours, watching the ladies for signs of impending labour and ready to fly into action if trouble starts. It's an important role for a farmer, and mistakes can be very expensive, but it's enormously time-taxing, and there has to be a better way in 2024, Matt.
There is a better way in 2024.
Yay!
Thank goodness that. And I know we've got some listeners that are farmers because I get some feedback from them on a semi-regular basis. So you're right. It is probably a stressful time for a farmer. You'd hope that your cows that are having calves are out there and they do what nature does, but sometimes they need a bit of a hand, and it's not worth the expense, also the discomfort for a cow to then have trouble in childbirth or perhaps even die in childbirth. You want to ring the vet, bring in some help, or help yourself, and I've talked to many a farmer who's had to get in there and help that calf out of the way.
Had first-hand experience there. I've said I've not got a lot of experience, but I have got first-hand experience. Yeah.
So one of the things that Nikon has done, and Nikon is well known for its cameras. My brother's used to be a professional photographer in my younger days when that profession existed. I don't know if it exists anymore because everyone uses their own smartphone, but Nikon was a big thing, and they produced some magnificent cameras. They've now realised that maybe not everyone's going to buy the high-end SLR camera like they used to buy, so they've got to branch out, and they're branching out into using their camera experience and combining that with AI. So they've created an imaging camera specifically for birth or cows giving birth to calves. So you sit the camera in an area that can capture your cows, and then with about 5 hours notice, they estimate, they'll be able to detect with their camera technology and the AI behind it that this cow is getting ready to give birth. So then an alert goes to the farmer's smartphone, and he can get there with plenty of time up his sleeve because there's at least 5 hours before the birth. Now, nature happens sometimes, so 5 hours mightn't always be 5 hours, but it would normally be a couple of hours. More importantly, you'd be there before the birth happens, and obviously that's when the problems can sometimes happen, when the birth is actually happening.
And you haven't had to sit around waiting for something to happen.
Waiting while you're meant to be out doing something else. There's fences to be fixed. There's other work to be done around the farm. Keep doing that. You get the alert on your smartphone, drop what you're doing, go over and make sure your cows are going okay. So it's fascinating, though, that you've got something so specific.
Yeah.
Nikon didn't say, we're going to do something that's going to capture a broad range of issues with cows. They're saying a cow giving birth. And when you look at the cost of it, the system itself, they charge you an annual fee, about $6,000 annually, but that covers the technology and the updates and the monitoring. And that's if you've got about 100 cows. If you've got a bigger farm, they charge you more. But that doesn't seem like a lot of money to me, given the value of a cow and the value of a farmer's time. I thought $6,000 a year to maybe help all your calves be born properly sounds like a reasonable sum.
And that's the price currently. As the competition picks up or as the technology becomes more readily available, I wonder, if that stays at that price or if it drops markedly.
I do wonder whether there's other companies out there, other technology companies who are saying, damn,
we missed
Nikon have got the jump on us.
Okay, what else can we do? What can we add to our camera that takes photos?
That's right. So maybe they've got the market to themselves, who knows. But I do love
stimulate ideas in other ways.
Well,
one that can watch sheep.
Well, there you go. It could do all sorts of things. But that one there, farmers out there, go and look it up. Nikon and AI imaging for cow birthing. I'm not sure what it's actually called, the whole system, but I'm sure if you Googled all of that, you'd find something.
And be worth your while. And just because we love primary producers so much here at Tech Talk, here's another story for those on the land. A lot of farm machinery relies on GPS these days, and from what I gather, it works pretty well. But getting access to the internet from out on the back paddock is another story. Surely in 2024 this doesn't have to be the case, and it really doesn't now that Starlink has peeled away the barriers for rural and remote folks, I should say. What about that, Matt?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And you've got lots of these farming agricultural machinery companies. John Deere is one of them, where they've got this wonderful technology and they've got it all working fantastically in the laboratory. And then the farmer gets out to their farm and they go, well, that's great, but how can I monitor, how can I do all these things you've talked about when I've got no internet access? Now, GPS is fine. GPS doesn't need internet access, so that can help the tractor stay on track if you're just doing self-driving. But you'd want to be able to monitor things. You want to monitor how your tractor's going. Are there any issues with it?
All sorts of other things.
So
checking weather forecasts. And,
you can do that as well. So John Deere has partnered up with SpaceX, who of course are the producers of Starlink, or the Starlink satellite internet system, and they've done a deal where basically you can get your John Deere tractor with Starlink service built in. I don't have pricing yet. It's so new there's no pricing that's been announced. But for a farmer, if you said, well, that tractor's now got access to the internet, so you can monitor it, you can keep on top of what it's doing, you can be sitting back, you can have one of the young staff around the farm, one of your kids maybe, driving their tractor, looking after it. You can sit back and you can get alerts back in the household if they're doing the wrong thing, if they're maybe driving too fast down that little bush track that you're going between paddocks, whatever.
Emailing distributors, all sorts of stuff.
Well, then on the tractor, exactly right, you can be doing some work because most of the tractors now, you turn it at the end of a row and then you sit back and let it drive for you because you want to make sure you don't, if you're sowing, for example, you don't oversow or don't have a gap between that. It's a bit boring along there, and some farmers say they just download a few movies and watch them on an iPad because they can't do effective work. But if you sat there with your tablet, you could, as you say, email some distributors, email off, do some work, catch up with whatever you're doing.
Facebook.
All sorts of things.
Sorry.
All those important things. So that seems like a great idea. Why hasn't someone done it before? Well, you could probably do Starlink, the mobile version, but probably people haven't thought about it and saying, well, this Starlink's new. Do I go and fit up my tractor with it? But if there was an option when you're ordering your tractor, do you want Starlink with that, sir? Well, sure, why not? Again, if it was a reasonable price, that sounds quite sensible. Now, the interesting part about this is that John Deere themselves have said that they want to have around about 10% of their revenue from software services by 2030. Now, so for them, that only really works if you've got connectivity, if you want to sell more software services, and they'd probably count the on-selling of Starlink as a software service. They'll do some wholesale deal, I'm sure, with Starlink, and then sell it. So it's not just about producing tractors. Mind you, they reported $55.6 billion in tractor sales last year, in equipment sales. So they're not going too bad for that, but they want to keep adding to that with services and with these various service sales that they go on. And the other big secret for all of these is to try and get the ongoing revenue. They don't want to just have the initial sale and then no more money after that. They want the ongoing revenue. Sounds like a good deal for John Deere. Sounds like a good deal for the farmers.
And as the warning lights start flashing away on the control panel with a total meltdown imminent, it's time for Matthew and I to make ourselves scarce before the authorities show up and want answers.
Was that meltdown coming because of the sonic booms we've been putting out?
Well, thanks for another cracking tech talk all the same, Matt.
Oh, my pleasure.
And while I don't think I'm likely to lose any sleep over the Apple Massimo affair, my wife may be keen on one of those anti-snore pillows, for me that is, and there'll be a good night's sleep all round and 99% less crankiness in our house. Thanks for tuning in once again, folks. It's always a pleasure to put in a little podcast together, and we're grateful for the opportunity that you and the listeners have allowed us. I'm your host, James Eddy, and together with Matthew, we're both looking forward to being back with you in a week's time for another episode of Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Until then, take care and we'll catch you later.